telling me at one point about a method that you've developed to help connect your clients' values into their planning process. And I'd just like to dig a little bit deeper and learn more about that method, how you help the client identify their values, for example. You say it's inefficient to do so, yet you seem to have to do that to do a job for your client, at least in your practice.
So what the one of the things that we did in my practice is, as you mentioned, we have Plexa Consulting, and over the years we've sort of realized that to make it even more accessible to a client who may not be quite ready for specifically legal services, we offer it through the consulting arm, and that way they understand that this is much broader than a legal instrument or a legal solution. And with that, I'll say the book aligned a governance framework for modern families goes through this process. The framework is structure, strategy, innovation. And it is done in collaboration with Jeremy Royal, who has over 25 years of expertise in governance and process management and organizational communication. The key things that hold families together across the generations. This is where disruption happens between generations, between family members, between cultures, everything else. And then on the other co-author is Dr. Lakshmi Prakash, where she has nearly 50 years of experience in science and technology and stewardship in those industries with leadership things. So they bringing those together with my background in cross-border tax and planning and wealth, asset protection design and wealth planning. What that does is that structure, you realize very quickly if a lawyer starts developing structure for a client, it is already misplaced. The lawyer's input is essential to develop structure. But when I say structure, I'm not talking about a CRUT or a dynastic trust or anything like that. When I say structure, I'm talking about the governing principles for the family. A lot of times you would hear, oh, this is a governance blueprint. That's also a little bit of a misnomer because it's not like an operating agreement or just a list of rules. It's about what actually happens. And that's where the person with organizational communication expertise comes in, which is that the blueprint and the governance framework may say that the patriarch in the family will make a decision about X or Y. At the end of the day, there may be a disconnect with a nephew who's actually handling the assets of that particular line. But how do you resolve that conflict without it being somebody skimming from the top or things being out on a line that wasn't even aligned with the rest of the family's interests? And that requires a structured governance framework that goes through conflict resolution. What are the various values and cultural discrepancies between the organization, which in a case it's a family, but if you're closely at businesses, those are families. Philanthropic ideals may differ between family members. What one considers to be, one may consider cash to be philanthropy, one may consider act to be philanthropy. And how do you bring those together? They're going to be misaligned on what ultimately becomes the instrument that they inherit or they put forward. Either one, right? That strategy is what comes after the basic framework is set. This is the box within which we must operate. These are the constraints. These are the issues. These are the places where we see that folks may not agree, or there are geopolitical issues coming into play that is going to threaten whether certain initiatives can expand or not, and all of that. And then you have strategy, and that is predominantly my lane, and it's what most expert advisors' lanes are, which is developing how do we ensure that that structure is feasible, viable, and sustainable. What do each of the participants in it now and in the future think about control? What do they think about flexibility with assets? What do they think about being directly involved versus indirectly involved? All of those have already been set by the structure, and now you're creating the the things that will further that in a tax efficient manner, in an asset protection manner. We call them various kinds of trusts, whether they're intentionally defective grantor trusts, whether they are charitable lead trusts, whether they are private foundations, whether they are DApps. It comes into that. There are people with hundreds of millions of dollars who never want to do anything other than use DAFs. There are reasons for that. It comes back to the structures about how they operate, how they communicate, how they want to do things. There are people with $1 million who need private foundations because of what they want to do with their lives and what they expect their legacy to be. Then the innovation part is where it gets very challenging because this is a part that I would say traditional estate planning has never addressed, which is I always joke and say, why is estate planning always planned with the underlying concept that the client is going to pass away within 24 hours? And the reason is you're not planning for the inevitability of change. One of the common things I hear even this week was that planning was done for a family, second generation in the US, completely US centered, no dual passports, nothing, no dual citizenship, anything. And they fully anticipate that they will remain in this country. They have minor children and they also have minor grandchildren. And the very good planning attorney, very good law firm, and they have fully aligned this family into a domestic planning situation. What happens when that child goes to school abroad? What happens when the grandchild does what I did, which is I immigrated from India and I effectively married a foreigner because my husband is from the South, all American for hundreds of years. So at this point, you're in cross border planning. What happens when traditions don't align? What happens if your philanthropy was religiously inclined and you have multiple religions within the family? You have to plan for flexibility, and planning for flexibility is often lacking in long-term planning. So the innovation part, it's not so much about showing the client here are all the solutions, but it is rather telling them that over time, here are the gaps that exist. And for that, we developed a system that we call it's now the Clexa method because it actually brings the governance and the innovation piece into it. It started out as a Royal method, which is assessment, strategy, and implementation. And the assessment, it goes through who the family or the client is as a whole across every sector. And it does an assessment of where are all the gaps within these three things. And then based on what the client's risk tolerance is and where they actually put their values, we develop a strategy. In a lot of places where every textbook and every academic institution and most concrete planning strategies will tell you that this client must have a trust, otherwise they're going to have a 40% estate tax put on a significant amount of wealth. I've had clients tell me that is fine
Hmm.
because of what their goal actually is. They wanted to have certain flexibility. They anticipated that the next generation was going to invest in certain things, by that would be offset anyway. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it'll not, but the risk belongs to the client, not to the advisor. So they should know what risk they're entering into. So I think as an advisor, our assessment methodology goes through what are their family structures, what are their constraints, what do they believe in, what things do they have in place, what are their technical considerations, what do they know, what do they not know, what do they really care about, what are the things they do. Sometimes you find out that the client is helping entrepreneurs somewhere in Africa for fun, and you suddenly realize that there's a whole philanthropic initiative that could be tax efficient. Now you can present that those come out of the assessment. So we do assessment strategy, implementation, and implementation strategy, as I explained, is where we go down the paths and develop the most catered strategy for the client. Sometimes it's tax efficient, sometimes it's not. That's also a decision the client has made, right? Because they know what they're entering. And then on the implementation is what you're very familiar with, which is to put the documents into place, whether it
I
is
love
holding
that.
companies, private
I
foundations.
love
So
that. My takeaway here is that strategy comes way, way after the fact, after all these governance and structural issues are assessed and agreed upon. So communication is key at the outset. And only then can a strategy be implemented, created, and implemented. That's fantastic. That's really interesting. And it really puts the work that we do in philanthropy in better context, really, and helps us understand where the clients are.